The sun hadn't yet risen when the owner parked his truck outside the store he'd built from scratch. He noticed something off. The open sign was dark, and the lock glinted with an unfamiliar keyhole. Before he could react, a voice barked behind him. "You're trespassing." The manager stood rigid, arms crossed, flanked by 2 police officers. The owner blinked, confused. "Trespassing? This is my store." The manager smirked. "Prove it." Customers trickling in for morning coffee paused to watch. The owner fumbled for his wallet, hands trembling as he pulled out his ID and business license. The manager waved them off. "Fake. I've never seen this man before." The words hung like poison. One officer stepped forward. "Sir, step away from the property." The owner's throat tightened. Years of labor, sweat, sleepless nights, pride, crumbled in an instant. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice steady but eyes burning. The manager leaned in, whispering, "No one's gonna believe you." As the officers escorted him to the curb, the owner caught glimpses of faces in the crowd, regulars he'd greeted by name, neighbors he'd hired, now staring at their shoes. A teenage employee filmed the scene on her phone, tears in her eyes. The manager slammed the door, locking the owner out of his own dream. But as the sirens faded, the owner didn't drive away. He sat in his truck, knuckles wide on the steering wheel, replaying the manager's smirk. A fire ignited in his chest, not rage, but resolve. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "It's me," he said. "I need your help." The screen faded to black, leaving only the echo of his promise, "This isn't over." The owner hadn't always been a businessman. Years before the locks were changed, he'd worn a uniform. A retired military veteran, he'd spent decades following orders, protecting others, and dreaming of the day he could build something of his own. When he finally left service, he poured every penny of his savings into the store, a cozy corner shop in the heart of his community. It wasn't just a business, it was a promise. A promise to himself, to his neighbors, and to the memory of his late father, who'd once told him, "Ownership is freedom." The store thrived at first. Locals flocked to buy fresh produce, homemade pies, and hardware supplies. The owner worked 16-hour days, stocking shelves, fixing leaks, and laughing with customers. But as his knees began to ache and his energy waned, he knew he needed help. That's when the manager walked in. The man was polished, sharp suit, firm handshake, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He'd managed stores before, he claimed, and spoke passionately about efficiency and modernizing the business. The owner, wary but weary, hired him. "Just handle the day-to-day," he said. "I'll focus on the big picture." At first, the manager seemed like a blessing. He rearranged the store to attract younger customers, negotiated with suppliers, and even set up a social media page. But subtle cracks began to show. The owner noticed how the manager's tone shifted when speaking to elderly black customers, patronizing, impatient. Once, when a teenage employee spilled a box of nails, the manager snapped, "Typical. Can't trust your kind to handle simple tasks." The owner intervened, brushing it off as stress. "He's just strict," he told the shaken teen. "Doesn't mean anything." Months passed. The manager grew bolder. He started hiring only white part-time workers, claiming they were more reliable. He'd lose invoices from black-owned suppliers and roll his eyes when the owner hosted community events. "Charity doesn't pay the bills," he'd mutter. The owner's gut churned, but he bit his tongue. Business was booming, after all. Then came the whispers. A loyal employee, a quiet woman in her 50s who'd been there since day one, pulled the owner aside one evening. "He's stealing," she said, her voice trembling. "Small amounts, here and there. From the register, the inventory. I've seen the spreadsheets." The owner's blood ran cold. He spent that night hunched over receipts, cross-checking numbers. The discrepancies were undeniable. Confronting the manager the next morning, the owner demanded answers. The man didn't flinch. "You're imagining things," he said coolly. Without me, this place would have collapsed months ago. Maybe you're just not cut out for this. The words stung, but what hurt more was the doubt creeping into the owner's mind. Had he lost his edge? Was he too old, too trusting? He decided to give the manager one last chance, a decision he'd soon regret. The owner's sleepless nights became a ritual. He'd wait until the manager left for the day, then lock himself in the cramped back office, poring over financial records under the dim glow of a desk lamp. The numbers didn't lie. Thousands of dollars had vanished, miscategorized as supplier fees or equipment repairs that never happened. Worse, invoices from trusted vendors showed unexplained price hikes. A local farmer who'd supplied fresh produce for years had abruptly cut ties. "Your manager said you switched to a cheaper distributor," the farmer told him over the phone. "Sounded real eager to get rid of us." The owner's hand shook as he hung up. This wasn't just theft, it was sabotage. The manager wasn't just robbing him blind, he was dismantling the store's reputation, brick by brick. One evening, as he sifted through a stack of doctored receipts, the door creaked open. The loyal employee, the one who'd first warned him, stood in the doorway, her face pale. "You need to see this," she whispered, thrusting a crumpled note into his hands. It was a memo from the manager to a real estate developer, dated 2 weeks prior, property acquisition on track. Owner distracted. Finalized deal by month's end. The room spun. The store wasn't just being bled dry, it was being sold out from under him. The manager had orchestrated a quiet coup, exploiting the owner's trust to hand the business to strangers. The employee gripped his arm, her voice steadying him. "He's been meeting with that developer every Thursday at the diner across town. Talks about prime location and cleaning up the neighborhood." The owner felt the weight of his age, his tired bones, the years he'd poured into this place. But beneath the fatigue, a spark flared. He'd survived boot camp, deployments, loss, he wouldn't let a conman in a cheap suit destroy his legacy. "I need proof," he said. "Something undeniable." The employee hesitated, then nodded. "There's a ledger. He keeps it locked in his desk. I've seen him update it every Friday." The following Friday, the owner arrived before dawn. He'd memorized the manager's routine: gym at 6 a.m., coffee at 7:30, store unlocked by 8. At 7:45, the owner slipped inside using his spare key, the one he'd hidden under a loose floorboard years ago. The manager's desk was sleek and impersonal, save for a framed photo of himself grinning at a golf course. The owner jimmied the lock with a screwdriver, hands slick with sweat. Inside the drawer lay a black leather ledger. The pages were a confession. Every stolen dollar, every forged document, every backroom deal with the developer, all meticulously recorded. At the back of the ledger, a post-it note bore a scribbled phone number and the words "final offer, $850,000. Quiet closing." The owner snapped photos with his phone, heart hammering. But as he slid the ledger back, a floorboard creaked behind him. "Looking for something?" The manager stood in the doorway, eyes narrowed. The owner froze, the screwdriver still in his hand. For a breathless moment, neither moved. Then the manager chuckled, cold and low. "You're in over your head, old man. Walk away now, and I'll let you keep your dignity." The owner rose slowly, meeting the manager's gaze. "This is my store," he said, voice like iron. "My community. You don't know what dignity is." The manager's smile twisted. "You really think anyone's gonna take your word over mine? Look around. This place is mine now." He gestured to the freshly painted walls, the redesigned shelves, the new hires who avoided the owner's eyes. "You're a relic. Time to retire." The owner pocketed his phone, the evidence burning against his chest. "You're right," he said quietly. "Things have changed around here." He walked past the manager, shoulders straight, and didn't look back. That night, he called his old military buddy, a retired lawyer who'd spent years prosecuting fraud cases. "I need a favor," the owner said. "And it's gotta be by the book." The next morning, the store opened to an unusual sight, the owner behind the counter, apron on, serving coffee with a calm smile. Regulars did double takes, some even cheered. The manager stormed in late, face flushed. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. "My job," the owner replied, handing a customer their change. "You've got a problem with that?" The manager recoiled, sensing a shift. He retreated to his office, slamming the door. But the owner didn't follow. Instead, he chatted with customers, cracked jokes with the teenage staff, and quietly slipped a thumb drive to his loyal employee. "Keep this safe," he murmured. "It's almost over." As the sun set, the owner lingered in the parking lot, watching the manager speed away in his glossy sedan. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "It's time," he told his lawyer. "Let's make sure the whole world sees this." The owner's plan was simple but dangerous. For weeks, he'd been gathering evidence, photos, recordings, and the damning ledger, but it wasn't enough. He needed irrefutable proof of the manager's racism and fraud, something that would expose the man's true character to the world. To get it, he'd have to become a ghost in his own store. He started by growing a beard, swapping his usual flannel shirts for a faded hoodie, and wearing a baseball cap low over his eyes. To most, he looked like just another retiree killing time. He began visiting the store daily, sipping coffee in a corner booth, observing. The manager didn't recognize him, or didn't care. One Thursday, the owner followed the manager to the diner across town. He slid into a booth 2 tables over, pretending to read a newspaper. The developer arrived minutes later, a slick, silver-haired man in a tailored suit. Their conversation was hushed but heated. The old man still poking around, the manager muttered. "We need to speed this up." The developer stirred his coffee, unflinching. "You said he'd fold after the lockout. Now he's back? This deal hinges on a vacant property. Clean out the inventory, scare off the staff, do whatever it takes." The manager leaned forward. "And if he fights? Then make him disappear." The developer's voice stayed calm, as if discussing the weather. "A man his age, accidents happen." The owner's blood turned to ice. He angled his phone under the table, recording every word. Back at the store, tension simmered. The manager's paranoia poisoned the air. He barked at employees, accusing them of theft, slashing their hours on a whim. The loyal employee, the one who'd risked her job to help the owner, became his prime target. "You think I don't know what you're up to?" the manager sneered one afternoon, cornering her in the stockroom. "You're his little spy, huh? Feeding him lies?" She stood her ground, though her hands trembled. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb." He grabbed her wrist, squeezing until she winced. "Tell your boss to back off. Or I'll make sure you never work in this town again." She yanked free, eyes blazing. "You don't own this place. And you don't own us." The manager laughed, but it sounded hollow. "We'll see." That night, she met the owner in the parking lot of an abandoned gas station. Her voice shook as she recounted the threat. "He's unraveling. But he's got friends, people who'll cover for him. You need to finish this. Now." The owner handed her an envelope stuffed with cash. "Take this. Get somewhere safe. I'll handle the rest." She refused the money. "I'm not running. This is my home too." The next day, the owner upped the stakes. He planted a tiny camera in a potted plant near the manager's office, synced to his phone. For hours, he watched the feed from his truck, sipping cold coffee. Around noon, the manager took a call, his voice booming through the speaker. "Yeah, the old fool's still sniffing around. No, I'll deal with him. Just make sure the cops stay off our backs." "What? The fire? That wasn't part of the deal." The owner stiffened. "Fire?" The manager lowered his voice, but the camera caught every word. "Burning the place down's too messy. We stick to the plan, blame him for the missing funds, force him to sell. If he resists, Well, like you said. Accidents happen. The owner's jaw clenched. They weren't just after his store, they wanted to erase him. That evening, he staged a distraction. While the manager was busy berating a cashier, the owner slipped into the office and planted a second camera inside the desk drawer. He also swapped the manager's keys with a duplicate set, ensuring he could access the store after hours. But as he retreated to his truck, headlights flooded the parking lot. The manager's sedan screeched to a halt, blocking his exit. Thought I wouldn't notice? The manager climbed out, a tire iron glinting in his hand. You're not as sneaky as you think, old man. The owner stayed seated, engine running. You're done. I've got proof of everything, the theft, the deals, the threats. The cops'll be at your door by morning. The manager swung the tire iron, smashing the truck's headlight. You've got nothing. Who's gonna believe a washed-up has been over me? The owner revved the engine, tires squealing as he reversed. The manager lunged, but the truck lurched forward, leaving him coughing in a cloud of exhaust. That night, the owner didn't sleep. He uploaded every file, every recording, to a secure cloud drive, then emailed copies to his lawyer, the local news, and the district attorney. At dawn, his lawyer called. This is dynamite. But we need to move fast. The manager's connected, he could bury this if we give him time. What's the play? The owner asked. Confront him publicly. Force his hand. But it's risky. He's desperate. The owner stared at the store through his binoculars. The for sale sign was gone, replaced by a banner advertising a closing soon, liquidation sale. Set it up, he said. Tomorrow. The final piece fell into place at midnight. The loyal employee called, breathless. He's moving the cash. Right now. Says it's for the closing sale, but there's duffel bags in his trunk. I think he's running. The owner threw on his jacket. Meet me there. And bring your phone. They arrived to find the manager loading stacks of cash into his car. The owner filmed silently from the shadows, zooming in on the license plate, the bags, the manager's smug grin. When the taillights faded, the owner stepped into the empty store. Shelves stood half empty, dust swirling in the moonlight. This place had been his heart, his purpose. Soon, it might be ash. But as he ran a hand over the counter, the same counter where he'd served his first customer, he felt no fear. Only resolve. Tomorrow, he whispered. The morning of the confrontation dawned gray and heavy, the sky threatening rain. The owner stood in his truck, staring at the store. The closing soon banner flapped in the wind, and a line of bargain hunters already snaked around the building. Today, the manager would empty the shelves, pocket the cash, and vanish. But not if the owner could stop him. He adjusted the tiny earpiece hidden under his cap, a gift from his lawyer, who'd rigged a live feed to stream everything online. In his pocket, a thumb drive held every shred of evidence. At his side sat the loyal employee, her hand steady on a phone set to record. Ready? He asked. She nodded. Let's finish this. Inside, the store buzzed with chaos. Shoppers shoved discounted goods into carts while the manager barked orders, his shirt sleeves rolled up, face slick with sweat. The owner lingered near the entrance, unrecognizable in his disguise, until his lawyer's voice crackled in his ear. Local news is tuning in. Police are 2 minutes out. Go. The owner stepped into the center of the store, tore off his cap, and raised his voice. Everyone. This liquidation sale's cancelled. The crowd froze. The manager spun around, eyes widening. You. This man, the owner said, pointing, stole from this store. Lied to you. And tried to sell us all out. He yanked the thumb drive from his pocket and plugged it into the store's PA system. The manager's voice boomed over the speakers. Accidents happen. Panic flashed across the manager's face. That's fake, he shouted, lunging for the controls. The loyal employee blocked him, phone held high. Stay back. Shoppers pulled out their own phones, recording as the owner played clip after clip, the diner conversation with the developer, the stockroom threats, the midnight cash haul. The crowd murmured, then roared. "Call the cops," someone yelled. The manager scrambled backward, knocking over a display of canned goods. "You're ruining everything," he spat, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the wall. "I'll burn it all down before I let you win." The owner stood firm. "Put it down. It's over." Sirens wailed outside. The manager's eyes darted toward the exit, but the crowd had formed a human barricade. A woman stepped forward, a regular who bought groceries every Sunday. "You overcharged me last week," she said, voice shaking with rage. "Told me I couldn't read the price tags." A teen employee shoved through the crowd, his apron stained with coffee. "He made me work unpaid overtime, said he'd deport my mom if I quit." The accusations poured out, price gouging, threats, slurs whispered to elderly customers. The manager backed into a corner, fire extinguisher clutched like a shield. "They're lying," he screamed. "This old lunatic's poisoning your minds." The owner turned to the crowd. "Check your phones. The proof's online, right now. This store belongs to you. And I won't let him take it away." Police officers pushed through the door, radios crackling. The manager dropped the extinguisher, hands raised. "Arrest him. He's harassing me." A cop, a gruff veteran with a buzz cut, scanned the room. "We've seen the footage, sir. You're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy, and hate crimes." The manager laughed, wild and unhinged, as cuffs snapped around his wrists. "You're all fools. That store's worthless. The developer's already." "The developer's in custody too," the cop said. "Thanks to your little recordings." The crowd erupted in cheers. The manager's face crumpled as officers led him away, his polished shoes scuffing the floor he'd once claimed to own. The owner climbed onto a checkout counter, the crowd hushed. "This place wasn't built for profit," he said, voice thick. "It was built for us. For birthdays, snow days, hard days when a cup of coffee and a smile kept you going. That man tried to take that from us. But look around, you're still here. We're still here." An elderly man wiped his eyes. "My wife loved your apple pies," he called out. "She's gone now, but, thank you." The loyal employee handed the owner a pie from the display, slightly dented, but still warm. "On the house," she said, grinning. As the crowd clapped, the owner's lawyer approached, holding a set of keys. "The deed's back in your name." "And the developer's offer?" "Withdrawn." The owner clasped his hand. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," the lawyer said. "You did the hard part." That night, the owner sat alone in the store, the closing soon, banner crumpled in the trash. Rain tapped against the windows, soft and steady. The loyal employee found him there, mopping the floor. "You should rest," she said. He smiled, leaning on the mop. "Not yet. We open early tomorrow." The store's grand reopening was more than an event, it was a celebration of defiance. Balloons in red, black, and green fluttered above the entrance, and a hand-painted banner read, "Built by community, saved by courage." The owner stood at the door, shaking hands with neighbors who'd become family. Some brought casseroles, others homemade signs. A local band played blues on the sidewalk, their music mingling with laughter and the clink of lemonade glasses. The loyal employee, now his partner, moved through the crowd with a clipboard. "Supplier deliveries are back on track," she said, grinning. "Even the farmer returned, says he'll work with us till he's dirt." The owner chuckled, but his eyes lingered on the parking lot. Weeks ago, it had been a battleground. Now, kids chalked hopscotch grids on the asphalt, and elders swapped stories on folding chairs. The scar from the manager's tire iron still marked his truck, but he'd left it unfixed, a reminder. News vans arrived by midday. Reporters shoved microphones in his face, asking about lawsuits, the manager's trial, the developer's downfall. The owner kept his answers short. This isn't about revenge, he said. It's about what happens when folks stand together. But when a young black entrepreneur approached, voice trembling as she asked, "How'd you keep going when everyone turned their backs?" the owner softened. He led her to the stockroom, where sunlight filtered through a dusty window. "You see that crack in the wall?" he said, pointing to a jagged line in the plaster. "First week I opened, a pipe burst. Flooded the whole place. I patched it myself, but the water left a stain. Could have torn the wall down. Instead, I let it remind me, storms pass. What's broken can still hold strong." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. "I needed to hear that." "Then take this," he said, handing her a business card for his new nonprofit, Guardians of Legacy, a mentorship program for minority-owned businesses. "We're not meant to fight alone." As the sun dipped low, the crowd thinned. The owner lingered by the register, counting the day's earnings, not just money, but connections rebuilt. A cough made him turn. The cop who'd arrested the manager stood awkwardly by the door, hat in hand. "Came to apologize," the cop said. "That day we escorted you out. We didn't know. Should have listened." The owner studied him. The man's eyes were tired, his badge polished but worn. "You're here now," he said finally. "That's what matters." The cop left a donation for the nonprofit, slipping it under a jar of tip money. Weeks turned to months. The store became a haven, a place where teens applied for their first jobs, where single parents traded babysitting shifts for discounts, where veterans gathered over coffee to talk about ghosts the world couldn't see. The owner's nonprofit grew, fueled by donations and viral videos of his story. He spoke at schools, town halls, even a national conference, always ending with the same words: "Ownership isn't a deed. It's love. And love doesn't quit." One evening, as he restocked shelves, a familiar face walked in, the manager's teenage nephew. The boy hovered by the candy aisle, shoulders hunched, eyes darting. The owner recognized the shame in his posture. "Need help?" he asked. The boy flinched. "My uncle. He's in jail. Mom says you hate us." The owner knelt, ignoring the ache in his knees. "I don't hate anyone," he said. "Hate's a burden. I've got too much else to carry." The boy stared at his shoes. He was wrong. What he did. "I'm sorry." The owner handed him a chocolate bar. "You ever need a job, or just someone to listen, you know where I am." Years later, long after the headlines faded, the owner sat on the store's porch, watching autumn leaves swirl. His hair was gray now, his steps slower, but the fire in his chest still burned. The loyal employee, now his successor, brought him tea. "Big order came in," she said. "City school district wants 500 lunches a week. Told em we'd need help." He smiled. "Hire that kid from the community center. The one with the skateboard." "Already did," she laughed. A customer approached, an older woman with a cane. "You remember me?" she asked. He squinted. "Ms. Eula. Peanut butter cookies, extra crispy." She beamed. "You saved this place." "Saved us." He shook his head. "Nah. Y'all saved me." When he passed, it was quietly, a heart attack at 82, while napping in his office chair. The memorial service spilled into the streets. Former employees, cops, lawyers, rivals, even the manager's nephew, now a college grad, stood shoulder to shoulder, sharing stories of the man who'd turned a corner shop into a compass. His will left the store to the community, with a single rule etched in the deed: no locks. No lies. Just love. The scarred truck still sits out back, keys in the ignition, for anyone who needs to borrow it. Epilogue. Storms still come. Locks still rust. But in a world where greed and prejudice never sleep, the owner's lesson endures. Justice isn't a moment. It's a legacy. And legacies are built by those brave enough to kneel in the mud, plant seeds of hope, and outlive the storm.